Hey, so in this slide, we're talking about the mRNA, and if you're unfamiliar with what mRNA is, you can see my other lectures for the in molecular biology. But mRNA is the middle step between DNA and protein. You go from DNA to mRNA or RNA to protein, and protein is that substance that is produced, ultimately produced that you're interested in. So in this study, they were looking at the same amount of cocaine being injected intravenously into a rat, and that same amount of cocaine could be injected either over an interval of 5 seconds, 25 seconds, or 100 seconds, and they compared that with what the brain looks like, with what the mRNA expression looks like in the brain, to a rat that was just injected with saline. So that serves as the control experiment. And so what you can see is that over 5 seconds, the expression is much, much higher. There's a lot more. You can tell that the brain is lit up a lot more with the expression of the protein, with the expression of the mRNA, versus over the same amount of cocaine injected over a longer interval. So this is beyond the scope of this presentation, but this is just goes to show some of the stuff that you can study in learning about the nervous system. So let's look at the organization of the nervous system. So we have two main components. Sorry about that. Let me just go back. You have two main components to the nervous system: the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. So we'll deal with more in a second. We're just giving this slide as a main overview that you can refer back to. So the central nervous system consists of the brain and spinal cord. So the picture on the left just gives you that picture, and the other half consists of the peripheral nervous system, which can be subdivided into the sensory division and the motor division. So the sensory division I like to think of as just think about it in terms of what it sounds like, the senses. What happens, for example, in this picture, when you touch something, when you touch a pan that has just been has been heated, it's obviously very hot. So the sensory part is what you actually feel. The motor part is then what happens after you feel that. So the actual consequences of what happens with your muscles, as in you immediately have a reflex to move it away quickly. So this is just a slide summarizing those two broad categories of what the nervous system consists of. So here again is the brain and the spinal cord. Remember that the spinal cord is not just those when you put your hand on your own back. The spinal cord is not what you're feeling when you touch your back. That's the vertebrae, the bones that are covering the spinal cord. The spinal cord is actually, if you pull it away, as shown in the picture on the right, the spinal cord is actually that spongy inner part as shown in the picture. Now, this is an important slide because it talks about what is meant by the sensory portion of the nervous system that we talked about just a couple of slides ago. And so it's really important to remember that there's no such thing as just five senses. We know of in kindergarten that we were taught about our five senses, but there's indeed many more than that. There are pressure receptors, there's our sense of balance, there's the sense of temperature in our body. So there are many different types of cells in our body that recognize and that recognize different types of senses. So what this picture shows is that this is just for the sensory receptor of touch. We have sensory receptors in our finger for when we touch something. That information, and we'll talk about how this information is processed later, but the information is then sent throughout the nervous system to the spinal cord in this way, shown by the green arrow, by the sensory neuron. Neuron is just a nerve cell, the cells of the nervous system. So this is just one way to look at this, is through studying what reflexes are. When we think of reflexes, we tend to think of when we're in the doctor's office and the doctor hits us with a little, well, hopefully it doesn't hit us, but lightly taps us with the device, and then we reflexively will send out a kick. So how does that actually happen? Well, starting with on the top left where it says A, some sort of stimuli in the environment, let's say, will cause our receptors in our skin to be activated. The afferent neuron with an A, which is important to be distinguished from the efferent neuron with an E, which we'll get to in a second. The afferent neuron is the sensory receptor which then sends information to the spinal cord through the path shown as B. So we have information being sent to the spinal cord. That information is then received by an interneuron, here labeled as C. The interneuron then sends information to a motor neuron, an efferent with an E, E-F-F-E-R-E-N-T neuron, which then sends that information to the muscle, and that information to the muscle then allows the muscle to move. So you have a very, very easy to understand